We'll be like two sweet peas, and we'll be the seamlessly heart-swept, and we'll be the great adventurers, and we'll be undefeated. If you stick with me, then I will stick with you. If you can stick by me, then I can stick by you all the way through.
All right, Her Rules Radio listeners, so excited to have you back here. This is a very special episode. We have my husband here, Bob Gower. Hi, Bob.
Hi, everybody. It's my first time.
Yay. You've heard me talk about him for the last couple of years. And today we are talking about our brand new book. We wrote a book together.
Hell yes.
Woohoo! It's called Getting to Hell Yes. I've alluded to it here on the show. I've been teaching it in my coaching groups to my private clients. I've talked about it a little bit before, but we are really going to take you through what is one of the most important tools in our life. We use it together. We use it with our son. Bob teaches it in corporate settings. I teach it to my private clients. This is like the foundation of how we live our lives, how we communicate to each other.
It makes everything better.
It really does. So let's talk about Getting to Hell Yes, why we wrote this book, how we use it, and we're going to take you through step by step this simple 4-step conversation that you can start using right away. Okay, yeah. So Bob, I'm obviously super excited to have you here. Why are you excited about this book? Why are we doing this?
Well, we're doing it, I think, because I said it makes everything better. I always go back to the kind of the origins of this. I think, I even had this tool. We've known each other for 7 years now. And this was something that sort of emerged early on in our relationship. And I always thought of it, this was a really valuable tool, but it's valuable for me. I don't know if it's valuable for other people. And then slowly, I'm not very quick on the uptake sometimes. So slowly over the last several years, I've just realized how valuable it is for how many different kinds of people. And a lot of that is just because, both of us keep getting phone calls saying, what was that method again? Can you teach it to us? And then as we sort of have delved into why it works or why it's valuable, I think every time I do it, every time I talk about it, I kind of learn something new about it and about why it's so valuable.
Yeah. So we started teaching this in some relationship workshops that Bob was hosting and I was kind of co-hosting. And, we wrote the book because we kept sharing it with people, and friends that we had shared it with kept emailing us and texting us and calling us and saying, wait, what was that thing again? How did it go? I need it right now. It was really good. Tell me how to do it again. And I shared it with my good friend, Rebecca Barucki, who has been on this show, who will be on the show again with her new book soon. And she took this format home, shared it with her husband, and got back to us so quickly afterward and said, I think this conversation is going to save my marriage. And she has been a huge supporter and a huhuge fan of it. And getting that kind of feedback over and over again from people that we love and admire and really enjoy working with it made us realize we have got to put this out there. And at first we started let's just put it in a Google Doc and we'll just start sharing it with.
Yeah, let's just not answer those phone calls anymore.
Right. We'll just have something really simple that we could send people to. And then we realized no, this requires a little bit more detail. And we're self-publishing this book. It's out in just a few days. We're going to tell you exactly how to get it. Because we actually decided not to go the traditional publishing route. We wanted it to get out there quickly. We wanted it to be a short book. It's only 60 pages. Mm-hmm. And we didn't want to blow it up into some 300-page thing with tons and tons. This is a tool. This is a 1 hour, maybe an hour and 15-minute read. So we love having something that works, that's easy, that we can give people.
And I think the other piece, have you had Amelia on your on your podcast? No, not in a long time.
I can't think if I have.
So we went and we studied we did a positive psychology course. That was probably like 5 years ago now, 4 or 5 years ago.
Yeah.
And one of the and positive psychology, of course, is sort of the science of personal thriving. It's sort of like, how do we make our lives better? And what's the evidence-based practices around that? And this all comes out of the UPenn program on positive psychology. But Amelia, our teacher there, she really summed it up. And she said, when you look at all the research and all of the different things you might do to improve human thriving, really it comes down to just 3 words: other people matter. Mm-hmm. And what I take away from that is that it's our relationships that form the foundation for everything else that we experience in life. And this tool is all about setting your relationships up to be really strong. And I actually credit it. I mean, we've both been married before. We've both had other relationships before. And I don't know about you, Alex, but this has been by far the most nurturing, the most rewarding. And actually, I feel like I've experienced the most sort of wild success in my own career, largely because I have really strong relationships, especially with you and with with our son, and I have these relationships in my life. So this process is all about putting your relationships at the center of what you're doing, making your relationships better.
And I know for my clients, I work with really driven, creative, professional women who work really hard, and they want to transform different areas of their life. Well, guess what? Those areas of their life, whether it's how they eat, how they nurture themselves, their career, their love relationships, their creativity, all these different areas always involve other people. And that always involves communication. And in order to make the changes in your life that you want, you've got to be able to enroll people into your vision. You've got to be able to talk with people in a way, in a fair way, where you can get people on board and get into alignment with them. And Bob, before we met and before we started using this, I really felt like big conversations were kind of terrifying. So I would often avoid them. Important conversations felt like confrontations. I felt like somebody had to win and somebody had to lose. And that kept me from having the conversations I needed to have to make the changes. And by using this 4-step process, you and I get into alignment. And that just means like we know where we're both coming from about specific things. We know what we both want and need. And we become more like for each other. That's the expression we keep using. We're like, I'm for you and you're for me, and we know what we're doing. And you sometimes call it an emotional prenup, which is like talking about something important together and figuring out what the landmines might be on the way to getting there.
Yeah. Do you want me to go into a little bit about the sort of the business side of this, or would that be interesting to your audience, you think?
So.
Yeah. So I work in the business world, and I work a lot with, really building high functional teams, especially at the leadership level, which a lot of organizations actually find quite challenging. It's much easier to have like sort of a high functioning team that's tactical, that's, building a marketing program, building a product, than it is to have a team that's not really building something together, but it's trying to run a business. And I work sometimes with some very large businesses or very ambitious, smaller businesses, but we're really trying to get the leadership teams to work together. And I always go back to a couple of sort of research-based things, a couple of research-based processes or mindsets. The first is, and your listeners have probably heard about this before, it's called psychological safety or team psychological safety. It was coined by a Harvard researcher named Amy Edmondson, who's been looking at how teams function and how to improve team functionality for about 30 or 40 years. She even worked with Google on their sort of Project Aristotle, which was, again, looking at how to build great teams at Google. And one of the things they found, I think, that was so interesting is that it doesn't really matter like what kind of people you put on the team, whether they're all overachievers or some are underachievers. It doesn't matter if they're all introverts or extroverts. It doesn't matter if you mix them. All of these sort of like typology-based mixes of teams didn't really matter. What mattered is the behavioral norms that developed, and the behavioral norms that seem to really mean a lot are people speaking about the same amount. So one person not really dominating things, and also the team kind of knowing and being sensitive to how each other feels. And it may be weird to talk about feelings in a workplace. I don't think it's weird. I think it's actually crucial, especially as people are doing more and more creative work. But if we are sensitive and if we know how each other feels and if we're all speaking the same amount, then we probably have a team which is safe for interpersonal risk-taking. We probably have something that's psychologically safe, a psychologically safe place. And this leads to what organizational psychologist Adam Grant, who, by the way, kind of works out of UPenn, he calls burstiness. And this is actually a technical term which describes like how people talk.
I love that that's a technical term. I think this word is hilarious and it's cute.
Yeah, it's cute. They actually put like a recorder in the room and they figure out like they almost like measure the decibel level of the conversation, how it rises and falls. And they did this. There's a great podcast. Adam has a podcast on the TED Network. And their first one was about the Daily Show and the writers' room in the Daily Show and how people were highly critical of each other. You know, these are comedy writers trying to do their best work, but so they could be critical of each other, but yet they had an environment where everybody continued to contribute in this bursty kind of way. And that really created that really is where the magic is. That's where the creativity is. And that's kind of where the fun is. And these are the kinds of environments. I can't tell you how many business environments I walk into that are kind of grim. Mm-hmm. There were people, you know, like it's all business. I'm all about the business. And there's like this sort of like undercurrent of anger or
I worked
disdain.
in one of those.
Yeah. I've worked in many of those. And so I really keep a focus on psychological safety quite a bit. And I think this is a technique for creating that. So this is a technique for generating empathy. And we always actually, when we say empathy, you know, sometimes people think of empathy as this sort of soft and fuzzy kind of word, but we both read this book by an FBI hostage negotiator a little while ago, who's not, you know, like the least touchy-feely person you can imagine, right? Like law enforcement, but also doing really what you would call high-stakes negotiation. And he said the single most important thing you can do is develop what he calls tactical empathy. So even if you don't like the person, you have to be able to sit in their shoes and understand their point of view. And I really love that. So we're not going into this thinking everybody in this conversation is going to be my best friend. But that doesn't mean it's not still important for me to understand how they feel, how they look at the world, what they think, and really to set aside my own agenda for a little while and just really listen.
Yeah, and I feel like this topic of empathy, before we get into how the conversation works, is very important to the people who listen to this show. We've talked a lot about, you know, people who are empaths. We feel other people's feelings, and this is slightly different. This is both people coming into the conversation. It's a way of listening. It's a way of really being there to try to understand the other person, not being an empath where you're trying to feel their feelings. You are really trying to understand where they're coming from, which I think is very helpful for people who are highly empathic. It can maybe create a little bit of a buffer so that you aren't taking on so much sensation from the other person. Instead, you're, you know, more listening. It's, you know, we talk about this framework sometimes as being a masculine framework in which to have an emotional conversation and a feminine process. So, you know, so think of it as not feeling the other person's feelings, but just listening to the words and getting a sense of where all the pieces lay for what you're talking about.
Yeah. And so, that's really a great intro to kind of what the process is. So the process is it's a 4-part conversation. And it's a conversation where each person participating, and, you know, you can have between 1 and I've actually done it with like 15 people. That's a bit much. It takes a long time because everybody has to speak. But I would say, you know, 1 to say 10, you know, 8 or maybe, you know, 8 is a good top. But it's a structured conversation where everybody, again, speaks about the same amount. So we're sort of mimicking psychological safety, even if we don't have it. So we're sort of creating an environment where everybody gets to speak and everybody gets to listen. And we ask people that they speak with some degree of vulnerability, some degree of openness. I always caution, especially in a work environment, modulate that yourself. Maybe try to lean into the discomfort a little bit. But if you don't feel like something is safe to share, you don't have to go deep dark. You know, you can edit yourself a little bit, but do try to be a little more vulnerable and always try to be authentic. No matter what you say, it may not be the deepest answer, but at least it's an authentic answer. Yeah. And likewise, when you listen, you know, we always say, like, look, you're not actually speaking as well. You're not ordering anything off of a menu. You're not going to get everything you ask for. This is real life. And when you listen, people aren't giving you orders and you don't need to argue with them. You're just trying to develop empathy. So you're going to listen with curiosity. I always say listen with non-judgment, but we're human beings and that's completely impossible.
So you might have a little bit of judgment. That's okay.
But keep it to yourself.
Right.
And try to set it aside and try to take it all with a grain of salt and just be like, again, go back to the curiosity. What do they mean by that? And this is just an opportunity to step inside of each other's worlds. And I'll tell you this, man, it's intoxicating, right? If someone really is curious about you and interested in how you feel and interested in what's going on for you, that person becomes an attractive person. They become a more attractive person, at least, than they were in the beginning.
I think so. I think it's a really, again, I've taught this to many of my one-on-one clients who then take it to their family or their marriage. And I've gotten such amazing feedback where, I work with 99% women, and I've had these women come and say, I used it and I realized that I would get so overwhelmed in conversation that was really important to me or about a topic that was important to me that I would start to cry, which would then make my partner shut down or want to leave. And we never got anywhere. And with this conversation, because we knew what the next step was and we weren't veering off track all the time, we finally got somewhere. And it's so valuable. So let's go into this.
Let's get into the conversation.
Okay. So first you want to set the stage. Okay. So this is like the pre-step. This is right before step one. And we did this just in the last couple of weeks with our son before starting 7th grade. We wanted to talk about, all right, this is a big year, let's talk about 7th grade, expectations, etc. And we went out to a beautiful brunch. We had time. We were well fed. It was a lovely setting. We were outside. So, pick a time and a place where everybody's comfortable.
And sober.
Right? Maybe have glasses of water for everyone. And, if this is the first time you're doing it and you want the other person to have a clue, we've definitely run this conversation with people who didn't even know about it. We just use it as a structure to talk about something. But you can, give them a heads up and be like, hey, let's talk about X tomorrow after the kids are asleep. Or, hey, let's set aside some time when you get home from work today.
You could even give them the book.
Yeah.
Or we have a cheat sheet as well, which is just a one-pager, which is a little faster to read. And that might get them curious and hopefully get into the book a little bit or you could have them listen to this podcast,
Yes.
But give the person a little bit of a warning about what's coming. And don't we always say that we have to talk.
Right. God, never say we have to talk because who wants to do that? That's always just scary. Just say, hey, I want to approach it in a soft manner, perhaps.
Everybody's been broken up with.
Right.
With those words
at the beginning of it. I know I have. Okay. So then if you're having the conversation with more than one person, like Bob does in a work environment, you'll set roles, right? So you'll have one person's going to facilitate the conversation, and then people listen, and then people talk. So there's no crosstalk. You're not talking over each other.
You're not commenting on what someone else is saying.
Yes.
I mean, I would say maybe a small positive comment. Oh my God, that's amazing, or that's great, or hey, that makes me think of X, that kind of thing. Those are all in bounds, but what you want to be really careful, and you can ask questions too, right? Curious questions, like tell me more about that, open-ended questions, your good active listening questions, right? Tell me more about that. What do you, what does this mean to you? What did that word you mean?
Or if you're unsure, you can ask clarifying questions. I'm not sure what you meant by that, and not in a snarky,
what do you mean by that?
Yeah, not like that. Okay, so that's it. Now we're ready. You set the stage, you know what you're doing.
Yeah. Oh, and the facilitator piece too, I'll just say, if there's more than two people in the conversation, I usually ask one person to be the facilitator. And I do this in a work environment a lot. And I do it in sometimes very high stakes environments with teams that have experienced a lot of dysfunction or a lot of emotion in the past. And so in that case, someone like me, or someone from your team who does not participate, and who doesn't have a dog in that fight. Is that a good metaphor for your people? Maybe not.
Sure.
Something like that. Who doesn't have a bone to pick. Mm-hmm. I don't know where all these metaphors are coming from, but who doesn't really care about the outcome, but someone who's just there to facilitate, someone who's not going to be emotionally invested in the conversation themselves, not going to participate in the conversation, and they're there to keep time. They're there to kind of help things move along, and they're and prevent that crosstalk or the snarky behavior.
All right. So then we've got our 4 steps: intentions, concerns, boundaries, and desires or dreams. So Bob, tell us what intentions are. You share your intentions. What does that mean? Well,
intentions are really simple. So we've also constrained the topic, right? So we're talking about, should we use the vacation example, right? So we're talking about going on vacation. And the reason we're having this conversation is so we can both have a great time, and so the vacation can be the best it can possibly be. So now I have to bring out my intention for the vacation, and these can be different, right? 2 people can do the same thing for wildly different reasons. So I could want out of vacation adventure and novel new experiences and
I want to sleep.
Intense physical exercise. Like I want to get in shape and have some fun. And this is not my style, by the way. I'm more of a have a glass of wine and sit on the veranda. But and Alex is the one saying, let's go to the beach. And the other person can be like, I want to finish this novel that I'm reading and not writing, that I'm reading, and that I want to to have a wonderful sensual experience. Mm-hmm. And those 2 things can be really different. You'll also notice that intentions are usually connected to your values in some way. If someone values novelty and learning, then those might show up, and those will probably inform why they choose a particular job, why they choose a particular vacation, why they choose a particular experience of any kind. And most people are driven, I think, by, usually, 3 to 5 kind of core values. And there's some great values worksheets you can use in order to get there if you're not quite there yet. And this is really interesting too, because sometimes you ask people why they're doing something, and they're like, well, because we have to.
Right.
And I'm like, so do you value keeping your job? If it's a job environment thing, mm-hmm. Do you value, following orders? Are you like some people really value order, in some way. We have to do it because the boss said we're going to do it. It's not for me to really comment on whether that's a valid intent or not. Here, we're just going to try to service it. Why are you doing this thing? Mm-hmm. That's what intention is. It's your why.
Yeah. So my why, and then your why. Mm-hmm. And then you move on. Okay, we know our whys, our intentions, and then you move on to concerns. And this is a place to air out all of the little worries, all the big fears, even the things that you might judge. Remember when we talked about non-judgment earlier? Try to not judge yourself too. All the things that you might judge as crazy talk in your own head, really put it out there. Make it a safe place for your amygdala, your lizard brain, that part of every human brain that is worried with survival. Put those fears and worries and concerns out there. It will really help to calm your nervous system. And, there have been times when, even in discussing, we used this 4-part conversation to talk about whether or not we should write this book. And in that conversation, both of us had the same concern that if we work together in a creative/professional way on something.
We've never done that before.
Which we'd never really done before. It will destroy our relationship. And saying it out loud, we're like, oh, that's not okay, that's kind of silly. That's not going to happen. But it's an important fear. And it became one of the guiding principles, one of the boundaries for this book was if it becomes a problem, the relationship wins. So your concerns can really they might be big, small, fantastical. But once you put them out there, this really does lead to psychological safety. It's like, okay, I finally said it. I said it out loud. I'm still alive. The world is still turning. And then the other person gets to just acknowledge it. And it's not an attack. You're not blaming anyone. It's just your fears. And then the other person shares their concerns. And I don't know if you have kids, but if you've ever listened to your kids talk about their fears and their worries, it just makes you melt. You just want to love them and tell them everything's going to be okay. And it helps you support each other better when you know these about each other.
And it's really helpful here to be specific, right? Not just be like, oh, I'm afraid things are going to go wrong. Okay, so what does going wrong look like? What does going wrong mean? Again, going back to vacation, like maybe one of us will get food poisoning.
Which just happened to happen on our honeymoon.
But we might, so like really be specific, like that it might damage our relationship, or we might be mad at each other, or I might hurt your feelings.
I'm worried I'll disappoint you. That's one that I always have. Yeah. I always have that concern.
Yeah. And it's like, and again, like you said, it's like, let the sort of cuckoo brain out. What I love about this particular section as well is that we're admitting that we're irrational beings. Right. And I always say that one of the most irrational stances you can ever have is to expect other people or yourself to be rational at all times. That is a easy to prove objectively that doesn't happen, right? That we are irrational people. So let's love that part of ourselves. Let's embrace that part of ourselves. And we have a strong negativity bias psychologically because it's a good survival mechanism, right? It really helped us survive. So it's really, really strong in our brains. It ain't going nowhere. It's not a flaw. It's built into the design of who we are. So we're going to embrace that here.
Yeah. So then we move on to boundaries.
Boundaries.
What is a boundary, Bob? Like I don't talk about this on every other podcast, but in case, let's talk about it in the context of this conversation.
Yeah. I always think boundaries are simple rules that we put in place to keep ourselves safe, as we define safe. I like to go back to the sort of the psychology of habit change, where they talk about a bright line being an easy thing to enforce. So it's much easier to say, I'm going to stop smoking completely, even though that's really hard. But still, it's easier to say that than it is to say, I'm going to cut down on smoking and do it. Because the no smoking, like you're really clear when you cross that boundary. You're really clear where the boundary is. But you also mentioned, kids, boundaries also, you want them to be binary. You want them to be clear. But at the same time, making them negotiable and flexible is probably going to lead to a little more happiness. It's a little bit of a paradox, but I believe that all good things have a little bit of paradox in them. But a boundary is just, it's really your self-care. What do you need to be your best? What puts you in the best space? And again, someone being curious about this is intoxicating, right? Like, knowing
wonderful.
Someone cares about that, right? Like, what do you need? Yeah. Tell me what you need.
I mean, when we go on family vacations, whether it's your family or my family, we have this conversation every time we're about to go on a trip together to visit family. And almost every single time, one of us says, I'm going to need an hour or two a day by myself. We're both kind of on the introvert extrovert line. So we often need time alone. So, okay, I'm going to want the car so that I can go and sit in a cafe by myself. Or, maybe, let's stay in a hotel instead of staying at our family's home anymore. Well, that actually just became a boundary for both of us in the last couple of years, just so that we have our own space.
It's amazing.
It's so good.
And it's so helpful. I mean, it's really, I just had, as you know, the best visit I've had in a long time with my family. And I really count it to good boundaries.
Yeah. Yeah. And it took a couple years to get there, right? But it's possible. Like, I want to underline this for all of you listeners. Change is possible. These old dynamics, Bob's family wasn't even involved in the conversation. Bob and I had the conversation before he left. He got clear on this for himself, and it has changed the dynamic of his visits, leading to better visits, better memories, better energy. So if you think that this is not possible, I dare you. I dare you to try.
And you also touched on, you probably touched on other podcast as well, but the boundaries, you always talk about like starter boundaries, right? Like that we often don't know what our boundaries are, that sometimes it's a question that we just haven't been asked or we haven't asked ourselves. I could say the same is true sometimes of concerns and intentions, but boundaries is where this really seems to show up a lot. And so, give yourself permission to try some on, what would be a nice rule that would make things better for you that you think you can ask for it? It's okay.
And again, we do this as a family on these family trips, and we talk about screen time rules. How much time will my son get every day? And because he's a part of the conversations, he feels ownership in it. And we never have arguments about screen time. It becomes a family commitment, and it really, really works.
Well, you're also really good with boundaries. Like you just have this way of talking about boundaries. There's no anger in it, but there's no flexibility in it either. It's just like, this is what's happening.
This is how it's going to be.
This is how it's going to be. Really good mom energy.
So the final part, we've done our intentions, our concerns, our boundaries, and then we always end on a high note, which is desires. Bob calls them dreams in corporate settings.
It's just a little more palatable.
Just feels a little more, appropriate.
Less sexy.
Apropes, as it were. So I talk about desires. Like, what do you really want out of this? What would be the most amazing end result for this vacation, for this project? Like, the best result for me personally, what I want for you to get out of it, what I want for us together. Like, really get excited. Let your creativity and your imagination go. You'll get so committed to it together.
And not just sufficiency, not just like, we will have succeeded, but really like what is it? Let's allow ourselves to dream really big. And in the last few years, I've actually found that I was aiming too low a lot, I think, in my business and in my life. And I've realized that it's much, much better to aim higher and to miss than it is to aim, at what I only accept what I think I can hit and be reasonable about. I think all of these things we're actually embracing our unreasonableness. And desires is like, let's embrace our unreasonableness in sort of wild terms, you might want to stick within Newtonian physics, and not.
I want to fly.
Yeah, I want to fly. I want to be invisible. I want a unicorn. But really, and I also often ask people to think about where they are physically in space and what they're experiencing. Kind of involve the senses in the vision. Like I'm standing on stage at a conference and people are applauding because I have just presented a talk on how successful this project was. And I can feel the heat of the lights on me and I can feel the applause, like that kind of thing. And so asking people to be really selfish and really, I don't know, you have this book on the table, brag, right? Like pre-brag, like brag before it happens.
Oh, I love that. I love that.
Yeah.
And through this, intentions, concerns, boundaries, and desires, you will find with the other person or people, or even with yourself, because Bob and I have been known to do this on our own for our own questions in our lives, you'll find if you are aligned, if you are a hell yes. And it's amazing what can happen. Like things become so effortless. Things get smooth. Things move ahead faster when you take a little time out to do this in advance. And the alternative is that you find you're a hell no, right?
Which is great to find out before you do something, like finding out like after you've invested time, energy, money, emotion.
Or you're in the middle and it's a catastrophe.
Right.
And that's why Bob calls it an emotional prenup, because you're kind of, envisioning in advance what your challenges are going to be and how you're going to handle it.
Another way to think about it is we're sort of mapping a minefield, I think people's boundaries can often be even to themselves, but they can be hidden. They can be things that people they haven't exposed them. They're not really clear until it's been crossed, until that boundary has been crossed. Then all of a sudden, then you've got a problem. And what's great is that if I know where the mines are ahead of time, I can either avoid them or we can kind of do a controlled detonation. Like if I have a boundary that's going to detonate one of your boundaries, then we can have that conversation ahead of time and maybe create a shared boundary that addresses both of those things, that keeps us both safe, that keeps us both. And again, it's like that. It's like I'm for you. I'm prioritizing you getting what you want, you feeling safe, you having strong boundaries, your concerns being addressed. I'm for all of those things in you. And by doing that, this thing that we're creating together has this multiplier effect, right? It can become so much better.
So that's our book. It's called Getting to Hell Yes. The subtitle is The Conversation That Will Change Your Business and the Rest of Your Life. So you can use it personally, you can use it professionally. And you can go to gettingtohellyes.com and download the book for free, or you can get it as a Kindle version for 99 cents. And we even have a beautiful little print version that's about $7 and ship it right to your door. And also on the website, gettingtohellyes.com, we have a video where it's Bob and I, and we'll take you through the conversation again in more depth. You can share that with your partner before if you want to, give them a little, tutorial. We've also got a cheat sheet and some other resources that will be really helpful. They're beautiful. Good job designing those, babe.
Well, it was our friend Susan who really.
Yeah, Susan was great.
She did the heavy design with me. I just tweaked some things.
Well, we're very proud of this book.
Very proud, and enjoy it.
Yeah,
share it, steal it, give it to everybody.
Give it to everyone. Yeah. We want this to be used. We really hope that this helps you, like it has helped so many of our friends and our clients, our colleagues, and our loved ones.
And tell us, how it went. It's stories@gettingtohellyes.com. We're asking people to kind of write in and tell us how I found out just today, a friend just broke up with her boyfriend, and they knew they were having the conversation about breaking up. And so they had this conversation about having the conversation about their breakup.
Oh my gosh.
So they were like, what is your intention to have when we're having this conversation? We know we're breaking up, so what's our intention?
Wow.
It was like meta.
That is awesome.
Really cool. Yeah.
That's probably one of the better ways to use this.
I think so.
All right, everyone. Thank you so much. Thanks for being here, Bob.
It was absolutely my pleasure. I love talking to your funky little mic here.
All right. Let's go to the kitchen and have a coffee date.
Sounds good.
Okay.